Thank you for coming. I want to welcome Stephanie Shakofsky, the Executive Director of the Center for Creative Land Recycling, which they pronounce C-Clear. They're headquartered in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they have advocated around the issue and have worked to implement infill development, and she will talk with us in particular about a state program in that regard. Stephanie has a BS in geology and an MS in hydrology from respectively University of Illinois and San Jose State University. She worked for 6 years in contaminant hydrology programs, has served as a technical analyst to the California State Legislature, and has served on boards and commissions, including appointments by Mayor Gavin Newsom to the City of San Francisco Port Commission and Mayor James Hahn to the Los Angeles Industrial Lands Commission. She brings a great deal of experience with us, and one thing that I did not ask you about, but I do know that many topics in hydrology dealing with transport and fluid flow require solving partial differential equations and systems thereof. And so possibly, if we're fortunate, we may get to see a few in this talk. But I suspect not. I suspect not. Please welcome Stephanie Shakofsky.
For that introduction, and thank you for inviting me here today. I run a nonprofit called C-Clear, and we are really focused on basically keeping all urbanized land into productive use, or in a lot of instances, productive reuse. We were started by the Trust for Public Land, which is the country's largest open space preservation organization. And what TPL came to understand was that there was never going to be enough money to purchase all of the open space that existed that was in danger of being developed. And so they kind of wanted a second strategy, and that second strategy was to have a sister nonprofit that was working to push development and push growth onto land and into areas where it was appropriate for growth. And so that was the genesis of our organization just about a decade ago. With funding from the James Irvine Foundation and support from Trust for Public Land. So we very much at C-Clear view ourselves as a environmental organization. Let's see, is there a... we use the term land recycling, but it's pretty much, I think, synonymous with infill development. We, as an organization, we really focus what we call in the trenches or at the project level. So we provide technical assistance, funding, support to people, communities, cities, affordable housing developers who are trying to redevelop already used land. And the idea and the mission of the organization is to learn the challenges from projects on the ground and then take those lessons learned to our decision makers and our policy makers and our legislators and try to affect change. So it's just this constant feedback loop of us being in the trenches, but taking those lessons to the policy and decision makers and trying to affect change at that level. And it's a holistic kind of feed loop that we operate under. And it's great. It's a really, it's a dynamic organization, and it's a dynamic mission statement that we have. I'm here today really to talk about one program that we are particularly proud of. It's called the California Infill Fund, and it's a $1 billion fund that the state of California created to fund urban infill or sustainable development. And I'm going to talk about 3 projects that were funded out of that fund. I'm going to call them case studies, and why they were deserving of public funding, And then at the end, I'm going to summarize where we are with the state program and talk about the challenges, the overall challenges of sustainable development and getting to sustainable cities. So back to the California Infill Fund, I want to talk a little bit about the genesis of the fund. And like all great ideas, this project started with a huge annoyance. This is the San Francisco Bay Bridge that came down in the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989. In 2005, nearly 16 years later, they still didn't have the funding in place to repair, or actually they did some quick repairs. They didn't have the money to replace it. The span needed to be replaced. So the state legislature was running around trying to find funds to build this new span of the Bay Bridge. And it was a very interesting time at the state legislature because they started talking about doing a bond to fund the Bay Bridge. Well, then the bond sort of expanded to fund the carpool lanes on 405. And then the bond started to get, even more with the retrofitting a bunch of bridges in San Diego. And there was this sort of piling on the infrastructure bond that went from the Bay Bridge redo to a lot of infrastructure projects across the state. One of the things that my organization immediately saw was an opportunity. And John F. Kennedy used to say that politics is like football, that you look for the holes, and you take the ball down the field when you find a hole in the field. And that was the opportunity that we seized here. As we saw the state bonds coming together, we thought this is a great time to put sustainable cities and infill development on the plate as well. So we went to the legislature, and I'll never forget talking to the governor's people and the leadership in the legislature when we suggested this infill fund to be put in the infrastructure bond. And I'll never forget what they said, which was, yeah, sure. So we were all a little taken aback, but we also had promised them that we could help, build the support for the bonds, because it had to go out to the public for a vote, and that our community would help with that building of the support for the bonds and raising the money to get the bonds passed. So that's what we did in 2006. This is actually the new span of the Bay Bridge, computer generated. It's not yet done. It was supposed to be opened actually this July, but it's just been delayed because of a historic building that needs to be routed around on the Treasure Island. And I'll discuss a little bit about that later. But now the opening is 2013. So 2006, the infrastructure bonds went out to the voters, $37 billion. The bulk of it was for transportation projects, $20 billion. We were able to get $1 billion in for this new, what's called the Infill Infrastructure Grant Program. The way it works is that these were grants to projects that could show that they met certain social equity criteria, sustainability, and readiness. Kind of, along the lines of the 3 E's or the 3 P's or the triple bottom line. That was the criteria for actually getting awarded the grants. In 2008 and 2009, the funds were all appropriated. So today I'm going to talk about three sort of case study projects that I think exemplify the program. But before I go into those, I just want to say something about the building of sustainable cities. You know, where I like to say there's 3 rules for creating sustainable communities. Unfortunately, nobody knows what they are. It is a very organic, a very fluid, a very complicated set of kind of rules and business that you go through to get you know, a community to build the right way. And I'm going to go a little bit out on the limb here to talk about some of the abuses that I see in our current planning process. And, you know, by going out on the limb, sometimes you need to do that because that's where the big, fat, juicy red apples are. But I will tell you that we feel that sustainability is not just, you know, solar panels, good building materials, electric cars, happy cars. It really is about design. And it's about how you design your communities, that they need to be walkable, they need to be close to job centers, with mixed uses and mixed incomes. And that, to us, is a sustainable city or a sustainable community. The creativity is really burdened these days with too much process. Average entitlement phase is entitlement meaning how long from sort of conception to get your, you know, building permits, 5 to 7 years. I just want to make one point, Jane, and then I'll take your question, which is I just read a book on the history of the U.S. highway system, and it was really interesting read, and it talked about how during that period in the 50s and 60s when we were building the freeways, the Federal Highway Department could go into the most wilderness places of Minnesota and find the poor African American community to run the highway right through. And that was really, you know, that period in our history was really, was born. And communities no longer allowed freeways to go through the middle of communities. And that, you know, that was a really important time in our history as a society and as we, you know, as a country, as we were growing and working through these issues. It was important that communities be involved in the planning process and in the development process and how their communities grew. I think now we've gone too far. That, you know, when you have so much community process, so much litigation for every project that, you know, you take 5 to 7 years to get a project entitled, you've got a system that's gone too far. You've got a pendulum that's swung too far in the other direction. And it is incumbent on us now and your generation really to pull that back and try to be more creative and work harder and work faster, because it's the only way we're going to address the issues of climate change. Jane, did you have a question?
I was going to ask you if the grants pay for the design and planning phases of things or the projects?
No, the projects, one of the criteria for the grants was readiness.
So that design that's important, nobody ever pays for?
The
Design, planning, phases.
Yeah, most of the time for these projects, they did go through, they were already entitled. In order to get the grant, you had to have a certain level of readiness. So these weren't planning grants. So most of these projects had been through a planning process. Were they all great planning processes? Well, we'll look at the projects and you can decide for yourself. The first project I wanted to talk about that was funded is the Sacramento Rail Yards. This is a 260-acre former rail facility in downtown Sacramento, adjacent to the Sacramento train station. This is a former rail maintenance facility. At its height, it employed 10,000 people a day when rail was the mode of transportation for the country. Today, it's pretty much an abandoned facility with old warehouses, buildings that look like this. There is now a plan to redevelop the site with 1,200 residential units, mixed use, incorporating the existing Amtrak station. This project received $83 million from the Urban Infill Fund. The bulk of that, and why I pulled this project out as a case study, the bulk of that $83 million was to lay in new roads to connect this very large site to the urban fabric. So existing roads needed to be extended through the site. And not only the roads, but they had to be bridges that went over the railroad tracks. So they were very, very expensive infrastructure that didn't exist before this fund. They've spent a lot of this money. This is the existing train station. It's an Amtrak, will be part of the high-speed rail project if that ever gets off the ground. One of the more interesting developments on the project now is not on this particular site, but adjacent to it and adjacent to the station here is the new site for the Sacramento Kings Arena. So there is some life on this project. I will tell you that the project itself today is in foreclosure. The owner of the site lost it to one of his lenders, who is now looking to try and sell the site. The site is entitled. A lot of the infrastructure has been laid down. So if anybody has an extra $250 million laying around, you can buy this site, pick up the plan, and start building. One of the things that's happened since the passage, the bonds were passed in 2006. The money went out in 2008, 2009. The housing bubble burst really sort of late 2007. So, and obviously certain communities have been hit harder than others. Sacramento is one of the hardest hit. This is the other end of the site. These are these old, abandoned, beautiful old brick warehouses. This is a rendering for the new project with an adaptive reuse of all the old warehouses into commercial retail space. This is also, the site on one end is connected to the Sacramento River. So there's a river walk component to the project. It's a great project. I will still argue it was well deserving of the infrastructure grant because the roads needed to get laid down. The bridges over the existing tracks needed to be built. But right now this project is somewhat in limbo. The second project I'm going to talk about is in Oakland. It's at the MacArthur BART station. I'm assuming everybody knows what the BART is here. Okay. This is an aerial photo of this site. This is a classic BART station that was built in the 60s. The station is this little piece up in the right-hand corner with this typical sort of LA sea of parking all around it. That's an 8-acre surface parking lot. And that's how they built a lot of the BART stations in the 60s, in the early 70s when they were building BART. Was you built the station and then you gave a sea of surface parking. it was the desire of the city of Oakland to redevelop this as a transit-oriented development project. They had some rights to the land. BART really had the major, BART, the Rapid Transit Agency, had the major control of the site. But the city went out and put an RFP out for a developer to come in and design redevelopment plans for the site. Bridge Housing, which is up in San Francisco, won the RFP. They have plans to do a huge mixed-use, mixed-density project on this 8 acres of parking lot. But the biggest obstacle was that they had to come up with the $25 million to build a vertical parking structure replacement for BART. And these were not funds that were available to the private developer and for sure weren't available to the city of Oakland. So they were sort of stuck. And BART didn't have any money either, we should just add. So somebody needed to build a $25 million replacement vertical parking structure, and that's where the bonds came in. So this project received $37 million in grant, the bulk of it going to the replacement garage. Yeah?
So prior to the grant, were the residential units on market, or was a component of that affordable, or did the grant spur the affordable component of the project?
Yeah, I think even before the grant, it was going to be a 20-80 deal. 80% market rate, 20% affordable.
Was that a requirement of the RFP?
Yes, because this is actually this is a redevelopment area. So redevelopment law, I should say, the old redevelopment law before it was thrown out required 20% affordable.
And the grant, did that supplement any affordable?
Yes. Yeah, of the 37 million, 20 of it went to the parking structure. About 15 of it went to support the affordable housing, and about 2 to 3 million is for the environmental cleanup at the site. There was some brownfield issues, some hydrocarbon, dirty soils that needed to be removed. But absolutely, with all these projects, the funds were being put towards the affordable housing component.
They think they needed all the parking again, the same as like it's used?
Yeah, well, that was the long negotiation. BART wanted, actually more parking than they had, and that was, just not going to be feasible. So ultimately, the agreement is, there will be 400 less spaces than there are now, actually. Yeah. And BART, they finally got BART to agree to that number. I think there was just an argument that, I'm not sure why they agreed to that, actually. They probably shouldn't, because one of my staffers lives very close to the BART station. He just knows his driveway is going to be blocked every day now once this parking goes away. But yeah, there is less parking for the BART station, and I think they basically argued that, less people were, there was going to be more use by the people living there, but doesn't really account for the people who are still driving and parking there. I can tell you that right now, the developer is paying, because the site is under construction, that up in the upper left-hand corner, that U-shaped building is actually an old motel that sort of rented by the hour. That has been demolished, and that is going to be that is the site for the new parking structure. So that is under construction right now. The housing component for this project it's on hold for now. Oakland is a market that's not really recovered yet, but we think in time, yeah, Go ahead.
600 residential units, what was that, how many stories was that going to be on top of each other? And how many stories, was it townhouses or what?
Yeah, it was a mix of density, and actually the original plan had 2 high-rises, but I think they're changing that plan now because if you know anything about the market, the high-rises are, you know, everybody wants the single-family home, then, you know, then the townhouse condo, and the least sort of, you know, the least popular product is the high-rise condo. So right now they're looking at a mix, I think, of some with 5 to 8 story levels across the site.
And are they going to be all rental or for sale?
That's another good question. I think at the time when this plan came together before the bubble burst, there was a lot of for sale. Right now, you know, and that's another, you know, it's another sort of backstory to this whole infill fund. You know, now that at the time when we were getting it through, the housing market was really heated. And you just couldn't put product out fast enough. Obviously, that has changed dramatically. So, you know, these projects are really starting to rethink and reshape their design and their product. I think right now they're talking about apartment rentals because that's really what's more popular. But that can change by the time they get to the market. By the time they get to the market, the for sale could be. So a lot of times you'll see these plans and they'll come forward and they're like, well, 600 residential units, and they'll ask the obvious question you just asked: is it for sale or is it rental?
Especially with the REO inventory that's
Yeah.
available, people can get a house and
Exactly.
affordable housing versus an apartment.
Exactly, exactly. In the Bay Area, the apartments are, it's kind of heated up the apartment market. So, but it's a good question. And right now, the development community is basically, they're asking for flexibility. You know, I want to build these units. Right now, it looks like the market is asking for rental, but by the time we get them up, it could be a for sale. Market is better, and we'll turn it into a for sale. Yeah.
You might have mentioned this, but what's the size of the financing for the entire project? I'm wondering how big the grant would be relative to the whole project.
This project, with its full build out, I think is at about $250 million. Yeah, with all of the units and the residential units and the retail, and there is some commercial for this design. And that includes the parking structure. That's about a $25 million structure. But the key for this fund is that parking structure was the missing piece that was keeping the project from moving forward. Now the market is keeping the project from moving forward, but.
Does BART charge for parking here, or is it free?
This is free. Yeah.
It doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to be free?
I mean, the parking doesn't have
Oh, this is currently free. I believe they'll be charging for the new structure. Yeah. Right now, the developer is paying for a valet service. For anybody who doesn't find a spot, they can have their car valet parked, and the developer is paying for that for some period of time.
Okay.
Yeah. It was all part of the negotiation. Yeah. This is a very interesting, this is a great project, and a very interesting neighborhood. This is the parking structure on the right. Very modern, gleaming, 5-story. I think it's close to 500 spaces. And this is a very early rendering of the commercial, the residential units there. So again, the parking structure is under construction. The housing is on hold. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, with the downturn in the market, how that sort of affected how you distribute the grants and the whole grant process over the last couple of years. I know these sounded like they were earlier, so.
Yeah, so these projects were, probably being formulated, going through their planning process in the early 2000s. The fund was up and running and granting in 2008 and 2009. The bubble burst about late 2007, just as these projects were all getting these additional funds that we claimed were the last, the critical piece to turn these deals. I can tell you that last year we had to run legislation to extend the grant period for all these projects for another 3 years. So that's, the money has been the money was all appropriated. I'm giving you sort of the 3 big projects, and also each with their own little story and why the Infill Fund kind of helped, was designed to help these projects get over that funding gap. There were about 100 projects funded across the state. A lot of them have been built, but they're much smaller. These are all, and if I didn't mention this, and it was really the impetus behind the fund, and also why I picked these 3 to talk about today, these were all considered catalytic and transformative projects. They're going to change, this is going to change this community, and the idea is you're going to have that ripple effect from this development across the rest of that community. But yeah, the reality is we had to go back to the legislature and get extensions.
So, sorry, I just looked confused. Is all the funding
gone, appropriated?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So that's that.
It was appropriated in 2008, 2009. But they had a certain period of time where they had to start construction, which was this year. So last year we were there at the legislature getting a 3-year extension for all the projects. So that's where we are. So to answer your question about what has the market done, right now it's everything is basically on hold. I mean, the housing pieces are on hold until there's some change in the market.
They allow redevelopment money to these projects?
Yes, all 3 of these projects had redevelopment money, and they're all obligated. Yeah. The last project I want to talk about is the Grand, which is downtown LA. This is a 9-acre mixed-use redevelopment with a 16-acre civic park. The residential units, 12,000 more or less, with retail, hotel, and now an art museum has been added to this project. This project received $37 million out of the fund, 20 of it going to Civic Park, which is the only piece which is under construction. The park, yeah, yeah. Have you not seen, this is actually a view of the park from City Hall.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, what's the boundaries as well?
So this is, yeah, this is Spring. This is City Hall right here. This photo is actually taken from, the top floor of City Hall. And that's the DPW building all the way at the end. So it's a 3-block city, yeah. This is, thanks, Sharon, looking west. This is LA's Central Park. What are you laughing at? Well, you should go see it. We should go take a field trip to see it, actually. This is a fairly recent photo.
You said you picked these 3 projects because they were catalytic
Yeah.
change to change. And
Yeah.
What was the catalytic change? Because you're putting a Central Park in LA.
Central Park, right. And then there is housing that's going to go around it. I'll show you the plan. There's 1,200 units adjacent to the downtown metro station. This is essentially, this is kind of an architectural map of the area, but this, here's the park, okay, the 3-block new park. This is a Frank Gehry designed residential retail complex. This is actually phase 2 of this project, which is kind of on hold right now. Entitled, designed, but on hold. This is phase 1 up here. Phase 1 now consists of the Broad Museum, this red piece right here. And this is, and I have a rendering of this, this is a 480 unit residential building. Again, a 2080 deal. So the original project included this phase here, and the park. The park is part of the community benefits agreement with the developer. The developer is a related company. Part of the development agreement and the community benefits package was that they support the development of this civic park. So this is about a $100 million park. Related is put in $50 million. The bond gave $27 million to the park. And then the joint powers, because this is city-county, is making up the rest of the park fund. The housing up here has redevelopment funds. There was also parking that was put in under the Broad Museum that was also redevelopment funds. This housing is, phase 2 someday soon, we hope. This is part of the civic park that includes a fountain. Renderings again. This is all under construction now. I think the completion is supposed to be sometime early 2013. This is also part of Civic Park looking towards a city hall. This is a band shell. And this is the Great Lawn where there'll be public concerts. And it's a great project. This is, on the right, the new Broad Museum, where I showed you before on Grand Avenue. And to the left is the related 480 unit. This is the 20% affordable, 80% market rate. And they are actually adjacent. We didn't actually have a rendering of both of them together, so we sort of photoshopped them. But that's about the proximity of these two new buildings.
So they've only broken ground on the park?
And the museum.
No, they did?
Yes. Okay. The museum broke ground late last year. Yeah.
Wasn't part of the development, they had to do the park first, they couldn't make the land, that was part of it.
Yes, that's all part of the, yes, that was part of the agreement, was that the park wasn't, yeah. And that's a really good point, Jane, because it was one of the other reasons why we felt, why we really felt that the infill fund was needed and important, because community benefit agreements cost money. And we love community benefits agreement. And for this project, part of that agreement was this grand park, that the developer had to put their own money in and had to find other money to build this public amenity. The problem was there's just not enough money in the deal to fund something like that. And over again, like the BART station, you know, the parking replacement structure, there was no money in that community or with that developer to do that. Like the Sacramento rail yards, there was no money in the city or by the developer to build all the additional roads and bridges that need to be, you know, to make that site work. So having that fund that recognized that these are all great catalytic projects that have tons of community benefits to them, it was really, it was, what's the word I want? Appropriate for public funds to flow to these public-private deals. And I emphasize that because a lot of the arguments that we had with certain members of the legislature was, and with the state agencies, was that it wasn't appropriate to use public dollars in a private deal. And that's a really, really interesting question. And we went round and round and round and round, and I can't tell you how many arguments we had about that question. Is it appropriate to use public dollars in a private deal? None of these deals are really private. They're all what I would consider public-private partnerships with huge public amenities to them that cost a lot of money. And as Jane points out, what happens more often than not, when these deals get put together and the developer agrees, oh yeah, I'll build a park, oh yeah, I'm gonna do 20, I'll do 30% affordable. And what happens is when the deal actually breaks ground and starts moving forward, all of a sudden there's no money for the park, and there's no money for all of those additional social services for the affordable housing, and those pieces fall off the table. And I have seen that, and I'm sure Jane has stories too, have seen that over and over and over again. So that's why, you know, we feel very strongly that public dollars should definitely support public-private partnerships like this. Yeah.
I know the Broad Museum was in talks, or was thinking about being located in Santa Monica, and I think maybe Culver City also.
Yeah.
Was some of that public money used to sort of get them to come on board with downtown?
I don't know. That's a great question. There was clearly, something was going on, because this museum was not part of the original redevelopment deal. And who knows? Usually there's probably 17 moving pieces in that story. You know, Eli Broad probably figured out downtown LA was easier than Santa Monica, number one. Certainly having the redevelopment dollars and I think it was mostly the redevelopment dollars that built the parking for this project was a huge benefit. So. Yeah, he also is very interested and very active in the Grand Avenue project. So there's this whole redevelopment plan for Grand Avenue downtown, which I think is fabulous. Jerry Brown did something when he was mayor of Oakland called his 10,000 plan. And he was so funny. You know, when he came to Oakland as mayor, you know, he looked around and he said, in the downtown area, which was the classic downtown, you know, it had been a vibrant retail where people, you know, lived and worked and you know, bought things, and it's pretty much a decimated downtown. And when he got to Oakland, he looked around and he said, we need some people down here. And he went and pushed what he called his 10,000 people plan to build 10,000 new residential units downtown. And he's almost there.
That's a lot of redevelopment.
And he used a lot of redevelopment money on that project. Yes, yes. And I think downtown LA sort of needs that same vision. You know, downtown LA will bloom, will blossom if you can get more people, if you can get the density and more people living downtown. So I think projects like this, you know, the more you know, as you get more and more people living downtown, then the retail, then the stores, then they start filling in. They go where you know, they've got paying customers. So I think LA could take a lesson from Mayor Brown and building more. All right, let me just sum up here because I do want to leave a few minutes for questions, which is the I made all these points before, but the lack of infrastructure, aging infrastructure, make infill development a lot more expensive. Community benefit agreements make infill development a lot more expensive. And when I say more expensive, what am I comparing it to? I'm comparing it to a greenfield or sprawl development. All these things add cost to doing what we know we should be doing, which is using the land we've already used, building in our existing cores, building on, you know, our older communities. All these things are more expensive than building a new development out in Riverside County. So for all those reasons, public funding is not only appropriate, I would argue that it's necessary. The entitlement process, again, needs some streamlining. 5 to 7 years for entitlement, in my book, is too long. And part of that is the planning process, and I know probably a lot of you are planning majors. And I'm not opposed to planning. I'm actually a big fan of planning. I just think that the process can be streamlined and truncated. I think you as the next generation, you need to be more creative, you need to work harder, and you need to work faster. You know, we need to really build these communities faster than we're doing them right now. That's all. Thank you.
I can self-introduce if you wish. Thank you.
Dr. Marlon Barnett will be discussing today. He's our new the director for the graduate programs and planning at USC from UC Irvine. We're very lucky to have him here. We're looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And usually as the convener of this event, I don't discuss, but we had a last-minute cancellation on discuss it, and so here I am, and I'm happy to provide some comments on this. This is a fascinating milieu and a fascinating idea, and part of this redevelopment, for a lot of reasons, is the future of development in California, and there's a lot of factors that limit the ability of our cities to grow out further. You know, people used to say there was always a next valley in Los Angeles to jump out to and build, and it's costly to extend the infrastructure, it's costly to commute, and there's a lot of reasons to believe that it's not environmentally sustainable to jump out to whatever that next valley might be. And so the question is, how do you incentivize projects that recover land, often either with environmental issues or in oddly shaped parcels or places where it is literally harder to build. And so the $1 billion infrastructure fund was fascinating, and it was good to hear about it. I have three comments that I want to touch on, and they go in this order. And the first one is, despite what I just said, I want to pause and ask, why would we want to do infill development? Even though I just said it was important, I want to pause on that. So why infill? The second question is, why grants? And this was a grant program, right? And so why would we want to do grants? And was that really the best policy and planning instrument? And the third question is, I want to talk a little bit about the entitlement process. And everyone's frustrated about the length of time it builds projects. Let me suggest that what we all probably mean when we say we want to build projects faster is we want to build the projects that we like faster, and the ones that we don't like slower. But why infill? And this is something that I think if we're going to put public funding behind this, and we do this a lot, we need to be more careful about articulating what the public purpose is. And there's a lot of possible public purposes, and some of them were being discussed at the time of this proposition, and then some of them have been codified even more clearly since then. But there's an idea that for reasons of air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, traffic congestion, quality of life, that one might want to both incentivize development on the fringe and also preserve open space. And these things go together, and I'm sure that your organization has thought carefully about how they go together. But in terms of open space, there's questions of mental health benefits, again, quality of life. Does the accessibility to nearby open space lead to higher land values? all of these ideas have been put out there. There's evidence for all of them. What I would suggest is that it'd be good to kind of clarify exactly what the expected benefits are, because literally we're putting $1 billion of public funding behind it. We'd want to have some sufficiently rigorous understanding of the benefits that we could be confident that we reaped at least $1 billion in public benefit. And so I think these reasons are there, but I'd caution that we'd love to kind of articulate those. The program is a grant program, and the economy unexpectedly turned very, very sour for all of these projects. And so that's certainly why they all have been in varying degrees of difficulty. But I note that the project in Sacramento, the rail yards, you said, is in foreclosure. And it sounded like they had done the basic infrastructure, the street infrastructure, the bridges, and I guess nothing else? Is that, no? Okay. And then the BART station is moving forward, although there does seem to be some oddity in that the parking structure, and the immediate thing that popped to my mind is why couldn't the parking structure self-finance? I mean, every privately owned parking structure in the state is self-financing. A developer goes in, gets some land, builds a structure, charges people to park there, and then uses that as a revenue stream to pay off the structure. And so the immediate question is, why could that parking structure not have self-financed? And then apparently, they both reduced the number of spaces and created a parking structure, which suggests that there was some lack of effectively accounting for the parking market. And the market discipline had been explicitly taken away when you said to the developer, no, you don't have to self-finance your structure. Here's a grant, go and do whatever, which then we ought not be too surprised if the whatever isn't something that carefully takes cognizance of the demand for parking spaces. And then the project in Los Angeles, to my eye, I think looks the best, because the public purpose was clearly separable to everything else. There's a park, it's being built. One could articulate benefits of the park. That's going forward. Other elements of the project appear to have been caught in the economy. And so the first hint is that the grants, by their nature, remove market discipline. Are there cases where we would worry about that? And in a particular case where one would have to measure demand, like parking structures, we might worry a lot. And so I would suggest some caution that maybe in the BART case, the market discipline was removed when maybe it ought not have been. In the case of the park, pure public good. Arguably, it exists for public benefit. It doesn't exist within the private market. It's probably least problematic that the market discipline was removed, and frankly, a positive. And so in some instances, in fact, in the LA case, the grant looked functional. In the San Francisco BART case, I actually have concern. And so it's not so much a public versus private. It's not that the public funds are flowing to private entities. In fact, in the BART case, they're commingling with a public entity. But it's a question of when the taking away of the market discipline would be problematic or not. And then the last point I want to mention, the entitlement process and the planning process. And this is difficult because all our projects go through a very slow and tortuous process. And what I would suggest for the students in the room is that what we need to begin to do is to conceptualize this not as the amount of time, and kind of that there's a certain optimal amount of consideration. That if you're going into a poor, predominantly African-American community in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, as did occur, and literally in a matter of weeks to maybe months, maybe they spent a couple of months, but it was more like weeks, decide that tens of thousands of people would be displaced to build a highway, and that really happened. And we think, oh, that's too little time. And then we think, well, 5 to 7 years deliberating over things is too much time, and so there must be a sweet spot in the middle. I think the issue is that there's a question of who has political power. And I'd argue that maybe in both cases, the 2-week blink of an eye in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the 7-year grinding don't do anything, it's the same folks who have political power. That in both cases, the poor, the underrepresented are still poor and underrepresented, and there's people who are quite powerful who have the wheels, so to speak, of the process. And so it's not the amount of time, but that if we're serious about empowering people, we have to think about where those voices are, and that's very tough. That might be one of the most vexing problems in planning. There's no easy way around that. But that if there is some attempt to use the entitlement process to redress not participation issues, but power inequities, then we may want to think about that as specifically that. So I've ranged far and wide, and I've done what I think, and I mean to phrase that what I've done is I've not engaged this talk at the level it was given, and I apologize for that, because this is about finding a fund that went through a political process and had some opportunities, and then became what it was. You know, there was $1 billion to be distributed, and it was not at that point the moment to rethink, would these be grants, or how do you redo the entitlement process, or all the things I'm talking about. So I want to be fair to you and your organization. You did fantastic work to plant the seeds of this in legislation, and this was amazing. And I think all these projects actually, once the economy recovers, will do great things. So I am aware that I'm kind of talking about a whole separate thing, but I do kind of want to encourage that we always do want to kind of step back and ponder when there's a next time, as there always is, what do we want to do? Do we want to kind of keep pushing the grant mechanism? Do we want to try to think about more subtle regulatory instruments? But I want to thank you, because I wouldn't have a chance to even think of these questions if your organization hadn't been lobbying and creative and pushing the ball this far forward. So thank you.
Yeah. Can I have one point of clarification on you're right about the parking structure.
Yep.
That deal, the developer does not own the parking structure.
Oh.
They had to develop it for BART. That was part of the deal, and BART was seeing the revenues from that, which are minimal.
Yeah.
They're not charging $20 a day. It's only $3. But it was part of the deal to get the site, was that the replacement parking had to be built by somebody else. So in that case, the developer nor the city are realizing the economic benefit of that parking structure in that case.
Also, I think it's not the market that you were talking about, because that's public parking. It wasn't the parking for any of the uses.
And it's wrapped up. There's probably a concern that if they price it, they reduce the park and ride ridership. So that is a difficulty, I'm sure. Go ahead.
Yep.
So were grants the only instrument that was considered, or did you look at loans or loan guarantees or something like that as part of it?
No, at the time it was grants. And it was grants only because of, and you know, there is, I think the question, and not that we didn't have that discussion over and over and over again about the appropriateness, and that's why I kept coming back to, is it appropriate, you know, for the public to support with their dollars these types of projects? The reason it was grants was before what I thought I had laid out were good cases where there was just no way the developer or the city or the community was going to be able to afford all of those pieces. So in the grant application, one of the criteria that the reviewers were looking for was that this was a real funding gap in the project. There was no other way that you could finance this deal or this piece. And so it was a rigorous grant program in that they were trying to suss out and separate, you know, are we just enriching a private developer here, or do we really have a great community-supported project that has amenities that we want to see, and we think that this is a good use of public dollars? So it was grants only. We are involved in we run a forgivable loan program for site assessment, for environmental site assessment. So we are very familiar with, you know, monetizing, or, you know, making sure that, you know, the public dollars are put out and they're brought back in, an appropriate fashion. This particular project, though, was designed to be a grant program for those projects that had significant funding gaps, but also met basically the criteria of the 3 E's. You know, they were socially equitable, they were environmentally sound, and they were economically viable, but for this missing chunk of money that the state was putting in. Yeah?
Do you foresee that procuring funds is going to get more difficult, or do you think a lot of the loans going through right now are going to be
Well, it's interesting because when we were working on this in 2006, when we put this package together and we went to the voters, we were all talking about, you know, oh, we get the money out in 2007, 2008, 2009. We're all at ribbon cuttings all over the state. And 2010, we go out with the next bond issuance with all these great success stories. Obviously, there was a wrench thrown in that plan. We are and you know, now we have because of term limits, we have a whole new legislature. So a lot of the people that we worked with, who were the real leaders in this program, are now gone. By the way, there is a term limit extension on the ballot in June. I would highly suggest you support it. It's my one political plug, please. Our hope is that it is something that we can go back out and refund again, because it's been a very popular program despite the housing bubble bust and the fact that a lot of these projects are kind of in limbo right now. Or at least, I shouldn't say they're in limbo. When do we say they're on pause right now? Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, one more.
So the $1 billion fund
Yes.
has all been allocated.
Yeah.
And what is your anticipated point of strategy for the ones that have been put on pause?
Well, we got a 3-year extension for them last year by the legislature. That was kind of hard fought too. A lot of people who thought, maybe there's other projects that are more ready than this, and so that, we really had to argue hard for your civic park.
So in the contingency basis, say that nothing gets done in the next 3 years of extension, what happens?
Those funds will be pulled back, and then there will be another round of funding that could go out. We're also hoping we can go back out to the voters too at some point. Yeah. So there may very well be a round 3. There were 2 rounds of funding that this billion went out. We'd like to do a round 3, but obviously some funds have to be pulled back. And they may very well be. Not your park, though, because that's under construction. That's been spent. I might argue you have some hometown bias for that project, too. But.
Maybe so. What agency administers this?
HCD, Housing and Community Development. Yeah.
How many projects did you approve for funding, and is there some that have been completed? Or
Yes. So there was about 100 projects that received funding out of this, and their grants range from, the smallest was like a $90,000 grant to the largest was the Sacramento Rail Yards, which was $80 million. The 3 I gave you today were all they were up in the larger category of large projects, but a lot of I would say probably more than half the projects that got funded are completed, but they were really smaller projects, smaller deals. The 3 case studies I brought you today were really what I consider large, urban, transformative projects. That's why I wanted to talk. And they were really the projects that we also led with as we were out to the voters and out to the legislators, trying to rally support. These were some of the projects that we were using as case studies then. So someday we're hoping for those aftershocks.
Other questions?
I just have one more with the question. She just asked, she said there were approximately 100 projects. Were there any that were inside the urban neighborhood of South Los Angeles, or in the urban area?
Yes. So there's a project called MacArthur. You do know who McCormick, Barron, Salazar? They're large affordable housing developers. They had two or three projects in LA that they got funding for.
And they were all housing?
The way the grant worked is that it had to be housing with some mixed uses in it, or if the project itself didn't have mixed uses, it had to have a mix of uses around it. No. I can give you the, huh?
We're really diverse, so
Yeah.
are you talking about Watts, Compton, LA?
I don't remember any in Compton. Crenshaw area, MacArthur area, I think the Taylor Yards.
On the other side of downtown LA.
Yeah.
That's a different dynamic.
Little Tokyo.
Okay, that's a different dynamic.
I think there was, yeah. I can give you the website or the list that shows all of the projects that were funded. Yeah, and some of them have been completed. And but for this fund, probably would not have been able to been completed. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. Let's have another one.
Thanks.